the teams that are doing really well are the ones who have built like a team of curiosity, a learning mindset within there. And I don't know that everybody always screens for that, when they hire people, but it's the curious ones who are going to spend their weekends hacking on the tools and trying new things and aren't afraid of this rapid, disruption that's going on and new ways of working. I think everyone's like feeling this pressure, like I got to stay up with what's going on. And if they built the right kind of organizational culture, they're doing okay with this. But if they haven't, there's a lot of kind of fear and FOMO going on because they're not really staying on top of the wave.
And there's a statement in there that's always stuck with me that learning faster is the only sustainable competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, how do you do that? I mean, how do you do that? How do you create that culture? How do you find those people? Like what have you practically tried to implement to make that happen?
Some of the tools I've used is like visualize the future. Like imagine a future where we don't have to guess what pipeline coverage is 3 quarters out. We have a system that tells us that. Imagine a future where, every Sunday night you get a list of 3 buckets. It's your high priority accounts from a lead scoring perspective. It's the bucket of accounts that are probably going to upsell, that should go after to cultivate, and the bucket of accounts that are at risk of churn. And it's all going to be delivered to you in email, and you can focus on that Monday morning.
Welcome back to the Revenue Dilemma podcast. This is a conversation about the hidden drag on growth and what it really takes for an enterprise to break through. Each episode reveals how modern leaders confront this hidden drag, remove barriers, and convert untapped potential into sustained performance. Today's episode is a masterclass in early-stage go-to-market discipline, tightening your ICP, moving beyond founder-led sales, and scaling a motion that converts predictably. My guest today is Jim Stoneham. He's a partner at SignalFire, where he works hands-on with more than 150 portfolio companies on go-to-market excellence. He's helping them sharpen their ICP, their positioning, persona maps, and guiding founders from founder-led to repeatable sales. Before becoming an operating partner, Jim led teams as CMO at Stripe and New Relic. He's also been a multi-time CEO and has helped high-growth technology companies through transformation and scale. Jim was the second person that I met at SignalFire when OnProfit was coming together, and he instantly grasped our vision and offered practical, founder-friendly advice that made partnering with SignalFire an easy decision. My favorite part of this episode is when he unpacks the founder magic problem, why great founder sellers stall when the first AEs arrive, and the checkpoints he uses to make that transition stick. In this episode, you'll hear about ICP discipline that scales, how to define, prove, and stay focused on a narrow ICP, and the traps that blow it off course. We'll talk about account-based marketing and targeted demand, and when to layer precision outreach and how to operationalize it without the spray and pray. We'll also talk about the culture of learning in this AI wave, screening for curiosity, and carving out the 20% tool time. And finally, quarterly sit-downs, one-page, double-blind performance rhythm that boosts ramp, coaching, and capacity. So let's jump in. Here's my conversation with Jim Stoneham. Well, Jim, thanks for sitting down with me. I really appreciate getting the time here in San Francisco.
I'm happy to do it, Tony.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I was thinking about it coming into this conversation. I don't get enough time, so I need to find a way to bug you and get on your calendar more. I don't know if you know this, but I don't know that I had a chance to tell you, but you're the second person I met at SignalFire when OnProfit was coming together and we were getting to know each other, OnProfit and SignalFire. Obviously, I got introduced to Wayne through a mutual friend and investor, Adam Zeppelin. But you're a big reason why we felt really good about partnering with SignalFire, because in that conversation, you not only got the vision immediately of what we were trying to build and the mission that we were on, but you offered some incredible advice, thoughts, perspective, which I really appreciated. So I really appreciate that. And so I guess with that, maybe it'd be helpful to start with just your role at SignalFire and how you help the portfolio companies specifically. That'd be helpful.
Sure. First of all, thank you for the compliments. I mean, I love meeting with guys like you or people like you who are building amazing companies. And if I can be helpful, it's always like my goal. So let's zoom up from that. Like that's what I do at SignalFire. So I joined about 3.5 years ago. And the focus I have is working across the portfolio and go-to-market advising. So everything from like, how does a founder figure out how to sell for the first time? If they're like a tech founder who's never done it before, obviously that's not your issue. You've done a lot of selling. But also how do they scale it up? How do they move from founder sales into, full-blown sales team, marketing team, the full go-to-market motion, basically, and all the fun things that go along with that as they kind of grow and inflect as they scale up as well. So that's my big focus at the company.
Yeah. I think that's incredible. Are there any particular areas that in the moment, especially early stage, where you find that you're spending the most time? Like, what are some of those specific areas?
I guess there's a few areas.
Yeah.
Like one of them is like what I call the foundations. Thinking crisply about the core ICP you're targeting, who the key personas are, what does that mean for positioning and messaging? Because as you know, it's how people receive that, not how you tell them, basically, and getting that really tight and thinking about like the thought leadership that comes out of those kind of core pillars of differentiation. So that's like typically an early on thing we do that I love getting involved in. I actually do it a lot of that one-on-one. And then the next kind of point is like, okay, I'm a founder, I'm selling, and the classic issue, the founder's got that credibility. It's their vision. They built the product and the company. They're great at selling, but now they're bringing other people into the mix, some early sales hires, and these guys are falling down. What's going on? I'm like, well, you're the founder. You've got the gravitas, and helping them understand how to make that transition and build a repeatable sales motion before they start to bring in like a scaling function, aka more sellers. And I guess the third area would be as they start to scale up, they're thinking about how to build a broad kind of go-to-market capability. How do they build demand gen? How do they do like hyper-targeting to their accounts? We do a lot of work around ABX motions and really targeted outreach. So helping to coach them through that whole process of how to build like a really strong organization that can go after like these large accounts, be effective at it, use data for targeting, and have a really kind of learning mindset around like engagement with their customers. Mm-hmm. So this is like at the 3 point, they're kind of different points along the curve, basically.
Yeah. I'm feeling the need to go deeper on all those three. So that sounds
happy to do so.
Yeah, really helpful. Well, and I'm curious too, because, you obviously had a long career, very successful as a founder, a CEO, operator, CMO, and now being on the other side, predominantly doing the coaching and the operating advising. What's maybe the biggest thing that's unexpected coming onto the other side in terms of, sometimes you learn the most working on other people's problems and getting out of your own. And what have you learned the most in this role that maybe was unexpected or you didn't expect coming in?
I think it's more like an amplification, I would say. I had done about 10 years of consulting with startups before going into some of my later operating roles. So I'd seen a bunch of the patterns before, but I think the like reinforcement that I learned seeing more of the patterns. SignalFire's got roughly 150 core positions in our portfolio and growing every day. It's a lot of pattern match opportunity, and I think the area that really came out for me was like how important it is to have a strong focus on the ICP you're serving out of the gate as an early stage company, and how you can go awry if you don't think about that, right? Yeah. So being super curious about where it's resonating, who your selection is for ICP, and knowing like who those key personas are within those companies to go after. I've always felt it was important, but boy, have I watched people make or break on that as I look across, like, not just our portfolio, but other competitive companies that aren't doing as well because they haven't been as laser focused. And as you know, it's really tempting when like a big enterprise customer knocks on the door and you're serving like mid-market. Oh, if we just build these 5 features, we can go capture them. And like usually that's a death spiral when you get involved in that. So that's, I think, the thing that's been the most, I guess, amplified for me and most critical in my thinking.
Well, I love that. Okay, we're going to come back to that topic, but I love that. So I guess as we start and go a little deeper, maybe taking from the experience from yourself as a founder and operator and now seeing across these patterns across portfolio companies, what's the biggest thing you see today that is holding back companies from growth, that things that people are feeling but maybe not talking about enough?
I think it's really about having really a growth and a learning mindset within the organization. So we're all facing rapid disruption with AI right now, especially felt in the go-to-market teams, right? And the teams that are doing really well are the ones who have built like a team of curiosity, a learning mindset within there. And I don't know that everybody always screens for that, when they hire people, but it's the curious ones who are going to spend their weekends hacking on the tools and trying new things and aren't afraid of this rapid, disruption that's going on and new ways of working. I think everyone's like feeling this pressure, like I got to stay up with what's going on. And if they built the right kind of organizational culture, they're doing okay with this. But if they haven't, there's a lot of kind of fear and FOMO going on because they're not really staying on top of the wave. Basically, they're getting crushed by the wave instead of staying on top of the wave and riding it.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that, experienced that myself, and it makes me think when you describe that. I read a book called Faster, Higher, Stronger, written by the former editor of Wired magazine. And there was a statement in there that's always stuck with me that learning faster is the only sustainable competitive advantage. And I'm curious, how do you do that? I mean, how do you do that? How do you create that culture? How do you find those people? Like what have you practically tried to implement to make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with the kind of people you screen and hire, right? I look for people with fairly, even if they're earlier in career, like fairly diverse set of experiences. Like, did they have a paper route growing up? Did they start a website on the side to make a little extra money? Did they, resell sneakers or comic books or something on the side? Were they showing entrepreneurial spirit essentially early? How do they spend their spare time? Obviously, we want people to have a full life, but the people who are like, curious and digging into a variety of topics kind of offline. So I often probe for that kind of stuff. And I ask them how they learn. Like, how do you learn about new things? How much of your time do you spend a day learning about new things? And, what's been the biggest surprises you've had and all that. So there's a bunch of screening that goes into it. And also just looking at their profile and kind of what they've done as well. And then there's interview tests along the way as we kind of bring people in. So that's been the way I think about it. And then once they're in the organization, how do you build that team structure, that culture to do it? It's allowing people to take risk, right? It's giving people the space to take risk. There's a I think it's IDEO that coined the phrase fail early and often when it's less expensive, basically. So we're encouraging people to try experiments at a small scale and like iterate rapidly and make it okay to do that and try to give people the space for that. For example, at SignalFire, my team's got about 20% time set aside for like dogfooding new tools and trying new things. And yeah, there's failures left and right, but there's some really interesting successes as well. So I think it's got to come from, honestly, from leadership. It's like ground up if you hire the right people, and top down if you set the right cultural norms, basically, within the organization.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really great point. It's sort of, and I've seen two sides to this. It's sort of this curiosity, learning, insatiable kind of curiosity to learn and figure things out. But then it also feels like there's some amount of change management a little bit, especially with AI. I talked to a CTO that said to me, we're talking about just the adoption of AI tools in their organization and the way their engineering team was accelerating and amplifying the work. He said, Tony, look, I've got 150 engineers and like 30% are all in and they're trying the new thing and they're tinkering and they're figuring it out and we're getting, some productivity gains. He's like, 30% thinks there's a big conspiracy theory here and we don't want to give anybody our data. He's like, and 30% are just being a bit apathetic and just not even participating. And I'm sure, because I know this person, like they've got a team of learners, like these are high performing people, I'm sure. So where does it intersect between like, it's actually more change management, even as much as it is just curiosity and I don't know what, because you kind of bring this up to me and it kind of
I mean, again, I've had to go through a few cycles on this. I brought data and AI into, so we called it machine learning at the time, into New Relic in terms of how we approached like our go to market. And it all made sense to people, but it was still a big change to like be guided by data instead of just guided by intuition, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I have to say it again, the people who had like kind of like that growth mindset and always like, beginner's mind looking at things, they were the most successful at dealing with it. And they were easily kind of part of the change, so to speak. And the people who are more resistant, again, if you psychographically profile them, you could see that they were just a little more resistant. And of course, it takes all kinds of personality types to be successful in an organization. So sometimes there are like archetypes for certain kinds of roles. Like oftentimes your ops team is a little more conservative. You want them to be stable. You don't want your numbers jumping all over the place, right? So sometimes those teams are slower to adopt these new technologies. But even in that context, I've found that if you've got the right profile of folks in those roles, it can make a huge difference with change management. But I think, some of the tools I've used is like visualize the future. Like imagine a future where we don't have to guess what pipeline coverage is 3 quarters out. We have a system that tells us that. Imagine a future where, every Sunday night you get a list of 3 buckets. It's your high priority accounts from a lead scoring perspective. It's the bucket of accounts that are probably going to upsell, that should go after to cultivate, and the bucket of accounts that are at risk of churn. And it's all going to be delivered to you in email, and you can focus on that Monday morning. And all of a sudden they see that as reality, and they're like, "Whoa, that only took like a month to come together."
Yeah.
So it's like a vision and then reality, vision then reality, and that kind of moves people down the curve or up the curve on the change management side. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. It also makes me think about, especially with AI in particular, is the rate of that change and how quickly you need to move up that curve. You know how typically in a lot of go-to-market organizations, they'll have a skill-will matrix, right? And you just plot people in against that skill and will, and ideally people are in the upper left or upper right-hand quadrant of that. And often I think a will is this always learning, insatiable curiosity. It's something that you want to do, but that skill will matrix, it sort of starts in one place and then moves up and to the right. And now someone who was in the far right quadrant is now in the bottom left quadrant. And I think now with the rate of change and the demands to adapt, maybe some people are getting left behind a little bit, who traditionally would be okay because they'd be moving along that curve maybe more naturally.
Well, the pace has picked up, right? Especially in this area, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. Well, I do want to talk a little bit more about just now talking about specifically revenue capacity in an enterprise or in a large organization. And as you've gone from being, CMO at Stripe into operating at SignalFire, what's the biggest drag you see on that productivity in these organizations? What holds it back?
Yeah, I think, interestingly, we've been talking a lot about people and their kind of psychographics and behaviors. It is the talent system around the revenue team. And I'm going to kind of focus on sales for a bit. I led the commercial sales team at New Relic for a little over a couple of years during a time of intense growth. When I took the team over, we were actually not tracking with market growth. We were behind, and we had to radically transform how I ran the team. And I got to really understand the importance of the talent system around the team. So, starting with how, as we talked, how we screen and recruit for people who have got this learning mindset and kind of are very adaptable. But then, how do you enable that team? A common pattern I see that's a failure pattern among any size companies, underinvesting in sales enablement and really helping people understand the new products, the new capabilities, how they sell the different ICPs or personas, all that stuff. It generally is under-resourced, and it's a point of failure for the team. And it means ramp times are longer. And you and I both know you get slow ramping reps, you've got less quote on the street basically as a result.
Yeah.
So, that's a big lever you can use essentially. Imagine you can cut 20% off ramp time. What does that do to you in terms of capacity, right? And then underestimating, again, on the talent system side, what's my attrition rate? What's my time to hire? All that stuff to build this kind of supply chain around your selling organization. How do I think about career pathing from SDR to commercial AE to enterprise AE to named account AE potentially, or sales leader?
Yeah.
So I find that teams tend to underinvest in that whole system. And if they invest well, it was something that was done well at Stripe, for example, and we built it to be well in New Relic as well, best in class was, if we built a strong enablement function, really careful screening of people, building clear career paths, and strong management around that, around not just the selling skills, but some of the softer skills. When that system's working really well, then you have predictable quote on the street. You've got lots of capacity. You've got the ability to flex capacity, which is so critical with high growth companies. That's when it all comes together, but it's often a failure case for companies.
Yeah. As you're describing that, which I totally agree. And look, it's always been for me personally, I come from a coaching background, right? And before getting into tech, so always developing people, investing in people, practicing getting better but if I think about the times where we underinvested or we didn't take it serious enough, it was mostly because we didn't quantify the problem enough. And I think that's what you're talking about, some of the metrics and KPIs that are very real. But if you don't really quantify that problem up front and know what you're leaving on the table, if you don't take those actions, you may just see it as a fluffy kind of thing. So I'm curious, when you have made those investments and someone's saying, okay, I've quantified the cost of attrition and hiring and lost productivity, right? And now I'm making those investments. What do you see move first, maybe when it's working and you've got a team that's fully enabled, that someone could go into their board meeting and go, hey, these investments that we made, so we made this investment here. Now we may have not made it elsewhere. Here's how we know it's working. Where do you kind of see it?
I mean, one of the leading indicators, as I mentioned, is ramp time. From time to hire to somebody being proficient and meeting their quota, basically.
Yeah.
That's a very strong early indicator, basically. Yeah. Same in other roles, like CSMs ramping and being effective at retaining accounts and growing them. So I think that's one of the leading indicators for sure.
Yeah.
And then it will eventually show up in things like conversion rates between stage, close one rates, which is, at the tail end of the cycle, basically on the sales side. But that's been typically what I've seen as leading indicators.
Yeah. What's your, if you had an unlock of around enablement, because now you're making me think, well, depending what you're investing that time to enable the team around, are you spending time on the sales process? Well, maybe you'll see forecast accuracy improve. Or if you're spending time on some kind of Socratic method in discovery and first conversation, you might see conversion from SEL to SQL improve. But if you had to go to around an unlock across all the ways that you could be enabling a team, do you have one area that you're like, we must be great here? And it's sort of is the classic, it makes a lot of other things easier?
Well, you're leading the witness a little bit, I think, but I put it in back to understanding the customer, right? Mm. So it starts with that. Where does a sales conversation start? It starts, a good sales rep will go in and say, "Hey, Tony, let's talk about your pain points. Let's talk about some of the challenges you've got in your business. What are your strategic goals?"
Yeah.
The real curiosity about who that person is on the other end of the phone or the Zoom call or in the conference room.
Yeah.
And more broadly about that account and who are the other people that are involved, right? One of the things that I often get into is what's the buying committee? And in my commercial team, which was startups from 2 people upward up to a 2,500 person company, my reps would say buying committee, it's 2 people, like they're the buying committee, right? And I'd say that's not true. They've got friends in their network, they've got advisors, they've got colleagues who they're going to check in on to see if this is the right tool to deploy. So if you think it's just one person you're talking to, you're wrong. So being curious about talking to that person, you're founding a startup right now, you're driving up, and I'm sure, you don't just talk to yourself and your tech team when you make a decision. You talk to people you've worked with in the industry and all that. So getting curious about that and understanding the people, for me, is the huge unlock. Because once you understand the people involved in the transaction, the people involved in the ongoing relationship, like everything else becomes easier.
Yeah.
And you start to build that connection with them, of course, as well.
Yeah, you're highlighting 2 parts of this equation I think are super critical, right? The first one, you're saying, hey, you have to have some empathy for the user, understand their business, know how to have a conversation around their business. I mean, there's nothing more deflating as a buyer on the other side when someone shows up and they have literally no meaningful way to have a conversation with you about what it is that you do. So I think that's super important. And then you're saying, how do we enable the team to now get to know the different stakeholders and their careabouts? I'm sure you spend a lot of time, and I've seen CMOs I've worked with and other leaders spend a lot of time encouraging the team around at different levels. What are the careabouts at that level? So you can have those broader stakeholder conversations and speak to them, not only speak to the more tactical person or to the more strategic, right? So there's a lot to cover there.
Yeah, the multi-touch approach to an account, especially a big strategic account, right? Yeah. Who's the champion? Who really signs off on the budget? Who are the naysayers in the organization? Who could be the secondary champions? All that good stuff, right? Yeah. And it can be 3 people. It can be sometimes 30 people, even in a small organization. Yeah. Strangely, it has to do with their culture and how they make decisions, right?
Yeah. So I am curious, because it comes to mind as you say this, like, how do you reconcile, like, look, I'm in a more transactional commercial sale. Like, I don't want it to be all of those things. And maybe the ACV isn't high enough, or it's not in my pay grade to handle that, or I've never been taught that before. What have you sort of deployed, or how have you broken down the problem to sort of, I think about it almost in terms of like, how you sort of meet that buyer where they are without over-indexing too much, where you've burned too many calories, let's say, to get a deal done.
Right.
So how have you found a way to get that in the team, but not turn them into enterprise sellers, which is ultimately not what they are? So how do you know how far to go and where to stop?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've been fortunate in that I've kind of cut my teeth in this area in 2 companies where we had a strong PLG motion, right? So both New Relic and Stripe, very strong PLG motions. Obviously, always work to refine those, and selling to primarily engineers, at some form, technical audience, essentially. So they don't want to deal with sales reps typically. They don't want to have that long conversation. They just want to like get going and be transactional, right?
Yeah.
But what's also true is they're human beings. And at some point, after they've been using the product for a while and they want their colleagues to start using it as well, and it becomes more of not an individual decision anymore, but like a team decision, they realize that they don't want to really carry that on their shoulders, like having to influence an entire organization and a VP of tech or whoever's making some of the bigger buy-in decisions. So as usage and potential contract value scales, all of a sudden they're like, I don't really want to own this anymore. It's like a homeowner starting to fix their bathroom up, and they realize at some point they need to hire a general contractor to like do the work, and they don't want to do it anymore, right? So I think coaching my reps on essentially like, we've got a PLG motion. Here's the right, we literally built up routing rules around this. Like, here's the right time for you to get engaged. They either raise their hand and said, I need help, or I want to talk about my contract, or we've recognized there's X number of people using the product now, and now it's probably time to like engage and say, hey, would you like a hand in like developing your relationship with our company? So it's really about knowing the person, and when they're like either objectively raising their hand, or like you get the signals that maybe there's enough scale there that it's worth getting involved, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's back to hiring people who are really good at reading people.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Even if it's like looking at emails and signals from product usage, not even like a conversation, right?
Right. No, I think that's great. I think that's brilliant. Well, on this, maybe we can get a little bit into the operating rhythm. So as I've gotten to know you, I know that you've stepped in as COO in some companies, you've been CEO at others. Obviously, you've led major functions, but tell me a little bit more about the quarterly sit-downs and where those play a role in the organizations you've led, and how revenue leaders and others can think about using those to make progress.
Yeah, so quarterly sit-downs is a little framework I built that's like a lightweight performance check-in every quarter. And I had only just used it for myself. I don't know, I can't remember exactly when I developed this. Is probably more than probably a couple of decades ago, actually. And I was at actually a conference, the Lobby Conference. I'm sure you've heard of it. Dave Hornick put this together. It's a really interesting conference. It's basically an unconference that runs for a couple of days, usually in a very glamorous location like Hawaii or Mexico. And I was in a discussion on performance management with other founders at the time. And they're like, hey, I've got this dilemma, performance reviews every year. I can't remember what happened in first quarter and all that. And I'm like, hey, let me talk about what I've been doing. So basically the way this quarterly sit down works is, let's say I work for you. At the end of every quarter, you'll fill out a single one-page thing. And it's basically, what did Jim nail? What are the 5 things he shipped this last quarter or got done this last quarter? What are the 5 goals for next quarter? What are his 5 strengths? What are 3 areas he needs to work on? And what do I think I can do to really help him to get there? And I'll do the same thing. So it's a double blind. We sit down, we swap. First question is, are we aligned? Do we agree on what I accomplished, my goals, my strengths, my areas to develop? And if we don't, that sparks the conversation, right? And it takes like 15 minutes to prepare for, and it's probably just it's one of my one-on-ones with you, right? And then we have a conversation around the areas to develop. And like, if we are not aligned, why aren't we aligned? Do we have to reset goal expectations, that kind of thing? So it's like a really interesting kind of check-in development conversation in a box once a quarter. Because in these fast-moving organizations, I don't know about you, like nobody spends the time on this. Like it generally gets overlooked. And it's so valuable to have that alignment with your, direct supervisor, if you will, and with kind of the person leading the team, and to get that feedback on a regular cycle. So when you get to the end of the year and we're doing like a yearly performance appraisal, I've got 4 data points from the year, along with my one-on-one notes, that are really important sit-downs in these kind of a little bit more formality, basically. And it's had big impact in the teams I worked on. Again, I built it in a kind of startup environment when I was looking for something that was light touch. But for example, I walked into New Relic when I took over the commercial team. I said, well, can I look at people's last performance reviews to understand how the team's doing, how the leaders are doing? I was told there were no assessments. I hate to impugn the team, but I was told they're not doing performance assessments. I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, sales reps are even making their quota or they're not. So why do we need to do something more than that? And I'm just like, what? So of course we like literally 2 weeks later, I'm like, we're going to start this process, right? And all of a sudden it created an open channel for sales managers and their teams to talk about those soft skills, those important intangibles that were going to help them be more successful in their career. And a chance to have a dialogue about like, hey, Tony, you're an amazing, leader of sales team. I want to learn from you. Like, how can I learn from you? So it opened up a channel of communication that didn't exist before. And guess what? Our reps all got better at this stuff. They got better at being curious. They got better at connecting with customers. And it was a massive success in terms of turning around, like not only the esprit de corps, but the skills built within the team as well.
Yeah. Well, I can't help but connect that back to what you talked about with enablement and the importance of enabling a team, and how do you do that without getting some form of feedback along the way on how you're doing and where you are and where you need to go. But why do you think, so I can't help it. It makes me get a little squirmy in my seat when you say, it wasn't being done. Hey, we've got a number. That's a bar. It's pretty simple. Like that feedback's right there on the scoreboard, basically.
Right.
Why do you think organizations end up there? What puts us in that place where that's the answer, or that's the place we look to? And how do you get to where you are? Like, what are you seeing in organizations that leads an organization to get to that conclusion that that's the best way to sort of manage performance and to get better performance versus the door that you're walking through? Why is that even a thing? And does it work?
I mean, again, I have a limited number of data points.
Yeah.
This is probably a broader study we should do, right?
Yeah.
But in the data points I was involved in, these are both organizations that basically were taking orders for a lot of their, sales rep would come in and basically, these were category leaders. They're doing really well. And the role of sales wasn't to sell, it was to take orders, right? So it didn't really require a lot of like nuance around this and really knowing the people at the side, because they're essentially taking orders. So that I think was part of it. And then when the competitive pressure lands, now you're chasing a number.
Yeah.
And we've all been there, right? Yeah. And you're not thinking about like the first principle stuff that gets you to that number. You're thinking about, I got to make that number, right? So I think those are the 2 different dynamics I've seen at work. One is like we move from order taking to a highly competitive situation, and now we're chasing a number, and there's not a lot in between in a lot of places, right?
I think that's really insightful because, and I've definitely been part of organizations where I've been leading the revenue team, and it actually starts with there's not a lot of respect for the sales role because it feels like order taking, and it doesn't feel like an area to invest. It feels like an area that's just we need to have it because, of course, we have some customers who need help along the way, and we should have some people call them. Why not?
Well, anybody can take orders, right? Anybody can market, anybody can sell.
So maybe it just starts with actually the perception of the challenge of the role. If it's not perceived to be very challenging, why would you invest a lot in enablement or in coaching and feedback, right? So besides the fact that it would be a really important thing to do, obviously, to help people grow in an organization. But I could see that. And then the part that you talked about, which for me, a revenue organization at its worst is one that's chasing it, right? That's playing from behind, basically,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
A lot of bad habits creep in, a lot of mistakes are made, a lot of customers are pressured to do things that they shouldn't be pressured to do, or let's say, right? So what have you done to help organizations get ahead of it and not be chasing it? So part of this is recognizing maybe what you're describing is where the market's going, what we need to do to be successful, and making some of the early investments to get there. But when you felt the organization chasing it, like what are some of the things that you might do to help them get back out in front, I guess?
Yeah, when org's chasing it, like there's some things that you see. Like one of them is it becomes every person for themselves often, right? And you start to lose this notion of institutional knowledge and institutional motion. So it's reinstating, moving from tribal back to institutional knowledge. And how do you do that? Like I did an amnesty day for pitch decks, and, across 200 sellers, I got 75 different versions of pitch decks because everyone started freestyling basically. And guess what? It wasn't always landing well. So, taking the best sellers, pitch is essentially making them be the standard. And everyone knows who the best sellers are in the organization. It's not a secret usually in most revenue organizations. So when you've got 10% not chasing the number and 90% chasing, you take what the 10% knows well and you make it be the standard across the organization. So standardization, believe it or not, people will chafe at, especially in enterprise selling organizations where they believe they've got all the answers. Fortunately, in a commercial sales team, people are a little earlier in career and a little more open to being coached like that. But, standardization was really key. And then I mentioned earlier, we did a very strong data practice behind it. So people felt like they had a little bit more control, a little more insight. Because, when you're a confident person getting on a phone, even if you feel like you're under pressure to make a number, you're going to come off a lot different to that customer than if you're lacking confidence. And this is where the enablement comes in as well. So over-rotating on enablement, the QSDs for coaching. So if you think about that surround, best in breed selling behaviors. We also did deal teardowns, and we often would try to even bring customers in to give us a debrief on a deal. So you'd see how the best sellers worked, basically. So that combination of all those things equipped the reps with the knowledge and the skills and the confidence that even if they're a little behind, they're only at X% of quota, they felt like they had the tools to win, even in a tough market, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, those are some great tactics there. And, one of the things I've seen as well is you maybe ask yourself too, why do we find ourselves behind? And some of it is we're not prepared enough, and we haven't replicated the things that we know work. And then part of it too, I found is also there's something that happens on day 3 of the month, right? That is going to come back to bite you on day 29 or on the first or second week of the quarter. That's going to come to bite you in the last month of the quarter. And it's sort of and that comes maybe back to some sales process things that it's making sure that you're not skipping steps and doing some other, and we could probably have a whole conversation around that, but that's another quick way to get behind is to skip some steps up front that then with the customer, you have to go restart back at 0.
Well, and also, another thing I saw, I'm not going to name names, but 40% of our business in one of my teams was closing the last 2 weeks of the quarter, basically.
Yeah.
It was very back-weighted, which is not uncommon, right? But what are the things we can do to move that up? How can we advance conversations sooner, to your point? Make sure we're taking the steps, but trying to front load those more. And we actually had to put incentives in place to give people extended quota credit for closing month 1, month 2, and finally got that more smoothed out or a little more smoothed out. But that creates a high pressure environment also you don't want, because if you're feeling like you're behind and there's this massive pressure in the last couple of weeks of the quarter, that is not a good set of chemistry to deal with.
Yeah, no, not at all. Well, I want to go back to a little bit more on the PLG motion, because I find myself talking to a lot of CEOs that find themselves frustrated, right? They've built a product, the product has great product market fit, but they still need a lot of people around the conversation to get a customer adopted or to get them converted. And what have you seen as the best approach to PLG? And maybe starting with, what does PLG really mean to you? Is it a product that converts and the customer is getting success without any human involvement? And what different layers of that? And then what have you seen to kind of make the most efficient, productive kind of, product-led motion? I'm curious.
Well, we call it product-led, not product owns the whole thing, right? First of all, right? So product's just leading the growth. It's not doing all the growth. So I think that's we should start by the definition of what PLG is, right? It's products taking point versus maybe a sales conversation is taking point. but you started to say you got to put a surround in place, right? So, some quick examples. At New Relic, we had a challenge where at a certain step of the process where people would install software agent to enable their observability product, we had a significant drop off because it required them to actually sign into a host and deploy software and all that stuff. We had a normal kind of PLG style self-serve onboarding flow with no human intervention at that point. So what we realized from just observing and talking to customers was maybe they're not the person who has the keys to the infrastructure. So we dropped in a little field that said, give us the email of the person who is, right? And that was one way of solving the problem. We also enabled live chat and put some of our more technical SDRs on that as well to help them through it. And it had about a 50% increase in the conversion rate at that step, which was massive because this is on the top of the funnel. So it was human plus, and actually another human. The email thing was mostly about getting another human involved, basically. So it was sales augmented at the right points in time. So it's really understanding that customer journey deeply, even though even the product's leading, and figuring out where would a human intervention be helpful. And not everyone's going to ask for it, but the people who need it really want it, and they're helped by that. So I think that's how I see the interaction working really well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really smart, and I like the way you frame that in the beginning, because again, I think there's a lot of conversations at the board level and otherwise. Wouldn't it be great if, or oh my gosh, it would be so amazing if we just didn't have to hire more salespeople, and if the product could just do all the work. Why isn't it just doing all the work? It's an amazing product, and I was at an organization actually where we really struggled to. We had a more time-based approach to engaging users through their journey, and we were looking for more significant sort of trigger-based or signals that we could act on rather than time, because time isn't a great indicator of so I'm curious, maybe some of the signals that you've seen when it is appropriate, or it is the best order to walk through, or even signals that you could unearth and create data that you could make sure you can capture to act on. What did you find some of the best data besides just pure hand raising, let's say? But
I had the good fortune to stand up really the first significant growth organization at New Relic, for example, and some of this work, we did this work at Stripe too, but first question was, did we instrument the product? And the answer is often no. And I even have this conversation these days with many companies. They'll say, "Oh yeah, we've instrumented." I'm like, "Really? Have you instrumented every button? Every screen, every page?" Like, "Well, no. We we look at session length and things like that." I'm like, "That's not good enough." So I push people to think about the customer journey through the product, and it's never like a linear path. It's often like a pinball machine. They're all over the place potentially, but there are patterns you can see. And the good news with some of the AI tooling we've got today is, I deployed data scientists, and we called it machine learning back in the day, so to speak. But you can figure out what some of the most profitable paths through the product are and how you build stickiness and engagement, right? So instrumentation is key. And I'm fond of saying, if you can't measure it, don't ship it. And I'm really serious about that with my teams. And I'm a product leader from the past as well. So once you've got that instrumentation, you build these hypotheses around what's going to pull them forward in the process. What are the kind of the triggers that will pull them forward? So my growth team built out a whole set of, very granular triggered emails and email outreach, basically, that would drive people to the next step. Hey, we see that you have deployed the agent, but you haven't invited another team member. Here's how to do that. Our open rates on those emails are in the high 70%, which is ridiculously high. And it was because it was the right information at the right moment for that person in the journey. If we had done it time-based, to your point, it would have fallen flat. Because in fact, that's what was happening before we changed it. And those open rates were much, much lower because they were at the wrong time. It wasn't when they were at that point in the product. So it's really important to have the data game down pat, have some hypotheses around the customer journey through the product, and constantly be curious about how can we build more stickiness? How can we pull them to the next step? When we roll out a new feature, how does that affect the journey? Should we put in new features to pull the stickiness forward in the journey? So it's a really strong collaboration across the team, and of course, including the product team, right? This is not just like a go-to-market team thinking about it or the growth team thinking about it. It's intrinsic to how you build a product.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think that's really great. Well, you mentioned some of the AI tools that are available, and obviously we're thinking a lot together, everyone is right now, on how to make the most of what's available and where things are going and how to build on the edge of that. But when you think about directly in go-to-market workflows, some connection between, go-to-market product, where do you see the biggest potential right now to use some of those capabilities to get some lift?
I mean, couple obvious areas. The first is what I just talked about, is customer insights and intelligence, essentially. In terms of product journey, their buying journey, it's become nearly trivial now to take a lot of unstructured data and basically to start to analyze and build these automated hypotheses around what's going to work, what's not going to work, right? So I think that's a huge one. obviously on the sales side, it's already happening, using AI tooling for stronger research, stronger intel. As I mentioned earlier, if you can get really deep in understanding that person who's on the other end of the Zoom call or across the table and like who they're connected to in the organization, that's gold, right? And there are various levels of good solutions here. I think it's still early, but like there's a lot of opportunity there. It feeds back into my core point of view, which is like knowing the customer really deeply is super valuable. And imagine AI mapping, them into lookalikes and personas that you can pre-test and things like that. So there's a lot of interesting ways to apply this potentially. And the same model applies to the success organization as well. Like, deep analysis on a cohort of customers. Most CSMs are quite stretched. They're usually doing a scaled model. So how do they effectively manage like a fleet of customers successfully? And it's got to be through like AI tooling that's going to do deep analysis, cohorting, recommended actions, maybe even automated triggers, automated outreach, that kind of thing. So I think a lot of the scout work that occurs in like, building PLG flows in sales research and in CSM monitoring is going to get washed away. And those folks are going to do more strategic work, which is going to be amazing.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And it's interesting because I think we're back to, like you said, enabling the team. And I love the fact that we're back to how does the team show up more prepared, have more insight. And I think that's extremely valuable. And then I'm also seeing a little bit of getting caught back into like the 30-30-30, which is a lot of how some of this goes, which is like the top 30% of the team is all in. If there aren't ways to use the tools and what's put in front of them, 30% are probably wondering if there's a conspiracy theory in the whole thing. And then 30% are still wishing that we could just keep doing it the way we've always been doing it. But I think that's for me also what I'm seeing is some of the fundamental challenge. And it's interesting to see some companies sort of mandate, use of certain tools, putting them in performance reviews, right? Coming back to the quarterly sit downs.
Yep.
What are you seeing working around that, or what are you most bullish on in terms of how to really get the team to adopt?
I mean, it's a bit, the interesting thing about sales, is it is a bit Darwinian. Like we can talk about coaching and all that, but at the end of the day, you're either making it or you're not.
Yeah.
And there's a strong correlation between folks who are leaning into the latest tooling and those who are in the top 20% of sellers who are getting the accelerators and the kickers because they're exceeding quota, and everyone like looks up to them as well. So honestly, I've seen even the laggards in my organizations like adopt because they feel like it's, adapt or die basically. So it's very Darwinian in sales. It's not as Darwinian in every other part of the organization, but certainly on the sales side, I've seen people like, even if they're reluctant to try new tech, the winners are going to clearly show the path for them. So it's learn by example essentially.
Yeah.
And it's happening more and more on the marketing team, more on the success side as well. So I'm a big student of people. And I believe that, people who are the shining lights in the organization, who are the always curious people, the first principles people, are usually the ones who drive that change. It's not going to be management telling you, here's this mandated tool. It's going to be those 3 reps who are killing it. And how did they do that? I'm super curious, know? So that I just believe in people that they're going to make that happen.
Yeah, I agree. We're fully aligned on that. I think about it in terms of like creating a pull effect versus a push effect.
Yeah.
I think you're way more successful in creating the pull effect, which is people seeing where the success is, who's having it, what's working, and everybody wanting more of that, versus the push effect, which is you're going to force it on people or mandate things, or, so I'm definitely a huge fan of creating that pull effect, which I think is essentially what you're describing.
Yeah.
I also think in the time that we're in, it's just because it seems obvious that is just a thing we should be doing. I still want to get the data to make sure it's working and it's having some effect, and that we're actually getting some lift, and we're not in some diminishing return category of like, I could get a 10-page report on, the latest earnings report and all the structure of an organization, but like, what am I actually using to make impact? And I think so. I still think seeing what actually is working, what's not working, not just assuming that wouldn't it be great if, because I think that's a lot of the conversation now. Like, wouldn't it be great if we had a meeting note taker that summarized the meeting and sent the follow-up email, but that's follow-up email doesn't have the intent, in it. That's right with some of the extra follow-up. It's just still,
I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right. It's a really great insight. And, for me, this is the difference between like the companies that are using horizontal tooling versus companies that are engaging using like more verticalized tooling. So I've seen examples of this across the board, and in our portfolio in particular, we have a strong like vertical SaaS focus. And is the AI tech underlying what they do that different? Maybe not, but the way they're thinking about workflow and integration and making it all come to life in a way that's seamless for the person using it is the differentiation. And over time, they're building out like these private data moats around this behavior too. So I think purpose-built tools by industry are what's happening now. We have a strong thesis around that at SignalFire, and it's going to make a big difference versus like a generic horizontal tool in terms of the uptake, the usage, the success rate with it, basically.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we talked a lot about data. You mentioned earlier, especially with AI, the ability to take unstructured data and make the most of it. Being able to tie it to these workflows. One of the things that I do end up hearing a lot is our data good enough to basically make the most of the tooling? And often I find myself asking the question and saying, well, when do you think it will be? So the plan is to get the data right and to get everything beautifully structured. Also knowing that one of the powers of AI is our ability to work with that unstructured data. But when do you think that'll be accomplished? By the end of the year? By this time next year? So my question for you is, it's obviously I'm asking it a little facetiously because it's always this ongoing problem, especially as we're creating more of it and or bringing new products or acquiring products that have to fold in or multiple CRM systems, right, from acquisitions. It's sort of perpetually messy, right? So as post the kind of AI boom, but also you were using this type of technology even before that, how do you think about really the state of where data needs to be to take action on it, and how you just sort of plow through some of that and continue to get results and not wait for the perfect environment, let's say, or setting.
Data nirvana.
Yeah, I guess if that's the thing.
I think part of it, I think strong data architects are really important in this, right? And I think being thoughtful about like what's the 80-20 rule here, or the 20-80 rule, really. What's the 20% of data that has to be tight and clean that's going to yield 80% of the benefit?
Yeah.
And then what's our, roadmap to eventually bring more and more of it in, essentially? And
I think that's super compelling.
Yeah, I think first principles, and that's super important. And you talk a lot about use cases. Like, let's start with the use case we're trying to enable. What's the data that's going to bring that to life? And then, like, how can we get that done first? And we're going to keep building on that success, basically.
Yeah.
The good news is we have a company in portfolio that's working on unstructured data quality and doing some amazing work there. So it's getting better and better and easier and easier, but it's no placebo. Like it's still going to require a little bit of structural thinking about like how to approach data quality. And I agree with you. I don't want to be sitting here waiting. I want to get going on something. So I'm a big iterator in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. You make me think of, and I think for a lot of the engineering teams, this will resonate, but I just hired a great founding technical lead, head of engineering, who we're in a conversation, and inevitably it goes to, well, that's going to take 3 months. And he's like, great, that'll take 3 months, but what can we do today? He's like, what can we do in the next week? And every conversation just gets kind of recalibrated back to that. And I love it every time he says it, because it just gets us grounded in that 20-80. And we just keep making progress, knowing that there's a bigger picture, and knowing that probably we're going to add more things in and things are going to get extended out. But I love the fact that you brought that up. So maybe one more question before we get into some of the closing questions here, because I do think one of the areas that a lot of people are going to be contending with for sure are sort of acquisitions, merging companies' products, and you've had, several exits in your career. And curious, like, which mistakes you see people most commonly make kind of post-acquisition and looking to make the most of that integration of platforms, products, companies. If you're giving advice to folks who are going through figuring out, how to make the most of it, what do you see as the biggest blockers to success that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think there's, a few things. I will forever compliment New Relic in the case of my last company that was acquired, and how thoughtful they were in the integration. So we became mainstreamed in the organization very quickly. And on the technical side, one of the experienced VP of Eng was put across my technical team, for example. He knew where all the skeletons were buried and how to work with every team. So we weren't on an island. Like the new kids trying to break in, we had like an enabler within the organization. I was plugged into the product org and the go-to-market org as well. So like they did a great job of like making us be mainstream part of the org. It was a significant product for them that they wanted to roll out with, with kind of reskinning and all that. But they made sure that we wouldn't run into barriers to be successful. And in fact, it was a quite successful product when we integrated in the organization. So I think being super thoughtful around like who are the sage hands in the organization that can enable, how do you integrate the team deeply into the organization, not without distracting it, but like make sure it's plugged into the right places, versus, hey, we just acquired this company, you see the press releases, we're not going to integrate them right away, we're going to, eventually, and everyone knows it's coming, right? You know this, right? Everyone knows it's coming. Like a year in, they're going to be like, okay, now we're going to integrate all of our CRMs and all that kind of stuff, right? I would rather go through the pain right away, because now that team's going to benefit from all that kind of support and infrastructure. At Yahoo, for example, one of the products I worked on was not operating in the same infrastructure as the other products, because it had been an acquisition, and they had been holding back arm's length. And as a result, they had the flakiest infrastructure of the company, and we had all sorts of problems with it. So as an example of how it wasn't done well. So I think mainstreaming is super important, and treating it like a first-class citizen and product within the organization. And we talked about the kind of the selling motion, and something that you guys are tackling is like, how do you bring a new product in and like enable it across the go-to-market team and make it be really successful? That's a key motion to get right, but it often fails because, again, it's not enabled as part of the core product offering. It's like, oh, this new thing we acquired, I'm not sure if I want to sell it. Isn't my there's all these confusions about how it's going to benefit me as a seller, and it shouldn't be. It should be like woven into the story. So I think that everyone talks about doing deep integration, but like actually pulling the trigger on a very deep integration approach is what I think the best way to go. And I've seen the failure cases be all when they kind of keep it an island and not integrate it right away.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And you probably have there's the complexity of there's near-term numbers. Maybe the acquisition was made on the thesis that there would be X amount of revenue this year in that particular product or company, and they get integrated in. And if you're going to take that pain now, you might, create some hiccups for that growth path. And so there's near-term pain versus long-term.
I would say one thing I would say to anybody who's in like corp dev or founders who are thinking about this, I would not put revenue earnouts in any of the acquisition terms, right? Because you don't know what happens once the company gets rolled in.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you've got like a team that joined, and all of a sudden they're being held to a number, but all the assumptions have changed around them. It's like, how do you predict what that's going to look like? It could be 5x bigger than they thought, or it could be 5x less, depending on how the antibodies like accept or reject essentially them in the organization, and how it's been integrated from a strategic perspective. So like putting revenue earnouts outs in don't make any sense to me. There's other ways to do it, but that's not one of them that's successful in my experience.
Yeah. What comes to mind as another way to do it when you say that?
Essentially, the earnouts need to be time and chair, assuming that the value is going to come out of it. So things like delayed vesting of, shares in the deal, so that people are going to be in chair longer, because you're theoretically acquiring a talented team. You want to keep them there. Things that are more retention oriented versus like make this number. So the earnout is like, you stick around long enough, you're going to get a little more, more cash on the barrel, or more or equity, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Versus like, make this number and you'll get more cash and more equity.
Yeah.
If you've done your diligence right, and you're acquiring a high quality company and team, that's the right approach, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. Okay, so when a founder or CRO comes to you and says, I'm stuck, what question do you find yourself asking them most when they come to you with that?
I usually start with, not surprisingly, ICP and like where they're focused, right? Because usually there's a sticking point around they've evolved from the ICP they started with, and all of a sudden they're running into friction, or they're trying to do too many ICPs at once. They're trying to cast too wide of a net. This happens I'm going to focus kind of on the early stage companies, because that's where I spend a lot of my time. And typically we've all got grand visions. We all want to like own the world when we build our companies. But I've also learned that focus is so important in the early days to build traction and learning patterns and like referenceability and with your customers and all that. So it's typically that they've taken on too much. They've tried to do too much with their ICP. And when I dig in, it's usually the answer. Their sellers don't know how to sell to a wide range of ICPs. The product market fit isn't quite there for everybody, right? So that's typically why they're stuck.
Yeah. So if I could just click on that a little bit to understand it better, like when we say the ICP, what makes up the ingredients, the core list, three to four bullets of the ICP that you really focus on most? Like what is in there for you that's non-negotiable?
Yeah, it's certainly organizational size is important, because it'll affect the behaviors in the organization when it comes to evaluating and purchasing things. Essentially, I'll just keep it very generic.
Yeah.
I would also say they're a psychographic and attitudinal profile. Are they a tech forward company? Are they a tech laggard? Because that's going to really affect their adoption of new technology for sure. I think the third thing is, of course, like industry / vertical / use case and pain points. Like, do we have a good fit? Are we solving real problems for them or not? It's really a qualification question. Those are the big ones.
Yeah.
And often growth, their rate of growth as well. Because typically high growth organizations you're selling into.
Yeah.
I usually am on the front edge of this. Like we're selling new technology. I'm not selling like toner cartridges. So it's like, are they adopting products quickly, right?
Right. No, I love that. It makes me think of, just personally as a founder, one of the things I'm struggle with the most is like, is this just something where I need to convince somebody of the vision and what's possible and they didn't know was possible and it's just going to take some time to do that? Or is it an organization that's just not getting there? And I had this experience being really early stage with an ed tech company that was very successful, grew very quickly. And it became really clear that Jeffrey Moore, the whole crossing the chasm was so on point in terms of us focusing on and identifying the innovators and early adopters for what we were doing, especially in that particular market. And what was interesting is we sold the lights out and covered so much ground on those innovators and early adopters. They had different buying processes than the traditional part of the market. They actually created these innovation funds and processes to bypass the traditional enterprise motions that were getting stuck. Like, it gets down to that level. When it's the right profile, they actually have different ways of buying because they know to get out of their own way.
Right.
But the other thing that happened that was interesting is that obviously we crossed the chasm from innovators and early adopters into the early majority. And eventually, late majority and laggards. But in that particular market, the early majority was a much smaller sliver of the overall pie. And so there was a wider chasm, actually. It took a little longer to get there. And then when you got there, you were going to face the late majority and laggards a lot sooner. But the point is, I actually had a conversation with the CEO and I said, should we just keep building products for the innovators and early adopters?
More share a wall, basically, with these early folks. They're so much easier to sell to.
But it's true. They're so much easier to sell to.
Can be a strategy, right?
Yeah. I literally was like, why are we even bothering to go to the rest? Like, let's just stay here and keep building products that keep solving this particular, problem.
Yeah.
But again, and then finding the data to support who are those folks? Like, who are those profiles? Company size is a little easier, certain criteria easier, but getting to some of what you said, kind of mindset and some other parts of this are harder. Yeah. But maybe that's where we could dig into, social channels, there's conferences, certain conversations that people are a part of more or less, but I think it's really insightful what you...
Yeah, I'm reminded of I don't know if you ever read the book, The Discipline of Market Leaders.
No.
I believe Andy Grove wrote it, or it was written with his name on it. And it talks about 3 different dimensions of excellence you can have in a company.
Yeah.
One's product leadership, having the latest and greatest, the best product in the market. The second is operational excellence. And the third is customer intimacy. And, product leadership examples are people like Samsung, Apple, folks like that. Operational excellence could be Walmart, Costco, companies like that. Customer intimacy, Nordstrom in particular. Home Depot for a while was really good at understanding their customers and having in-store demos and things like that. And the point of the book was you can break out on one. You can differentiate on one, but you can't break out on all 3 at once. It's just not impossible because it's an organizational culture thing, but you have to be table stakes in the other 2. So when you're having that conversation, you guys could have you could have chosen that product leadership vector as long as you truly leaned into it and did it well, but you couldn't let go of those other 2. You'd have to be table stakes there. So I always thought of it as a provocative book to think about what kind of culture are we building? What kind of, how are we driving growth in our company? Which one of these vectors are we leaning into? Because there's no argument that Walmart's growing like crazy, right? There's an argument that Home Depot has also grown like crazy. So has Apple. They've all grown, but they've taken different paths to get there culturally.
Yeah. I love that. Well, maybe we can wrap up the conversation here, and I'll just wrap it up this way. One, I'm really grateful to be part of the SignalFire portfolio and to work with Wayne, yourself, Ilya, the rest of the team, Chris. And I don't think I've ever told you this story. I've said it to a few founders who I've talked to about SignalFire in particular, but it was a very intense 9-day process to go through the diligence with SignalFire. Several meetings, back-to-back things, surgical in terms of a process. And by the end of it, Wayne and I were sharing messages and talking on the phone, super excited to go build a generational company together. And I said to Wayne, look, through this process, you guys, SignalFire, has brought out the best in nonprofit. And I really feel that way, that attention to detail, that diligence, the way the whole conversation was handled. And through that, I've seen the best in SignalFire as a result of that, which is, again, the care and attention that you all pay to what you're doing and how much you care about helping founders and helping companies succeed. So I want to leverage more of that from you along the way. I haven't done enough of it, and that's shame on me, but I do appreciate you sitting down and have this conversation. But thank you. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'm really excited about what you guys are building as well. I can't wait to see the world hear more about it in the coming weeks, months, years.
Yeah, for sure. Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Join the Revenue Dilemma conversation. Hit subscribe, share, and like everywhere you listen. It's time we solve the revenue dilemma once and for all.